Hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach podcast. And I am here with yet another high demand coach and consultant, Michael Roub. He is the managing partner and founder of Inflection 360. He has more than 2 decades of experience in business as a strategic advisor, consultant, corporate executive, and investment banker. Now, prior to starting Inflection 360, Michael had senior business development roles at Western Dental Services and U.S. HealthWorks. Now, Michael began his career as an investment banker with Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, where he advised clients on a wide range of capital raising, mergers and acquisitions, and restructuring efforts. And Michael has extensive experience with corporate development, mergers, acquisitions, and capital raising. And one of the things I mentioned this, Michael, as you're coming on, I love the fact that you're able to specify and dial in on an industry. Take all of that and instead of kind of giving the generic advice that a lot of people are faced with, being able to apply that specifically to their world. And I'm excited to jump into that, particularly within the healthcare industry. But before we get there, I'd love you just unpack this story for us a little bit. There's so much in there. How did that ultimately lead you to make the leap and become a consultant?
Well, first of all, Scott, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your guests. It sounds like a winding road, how I got to where I am today, because it actually was. It was never my intention to be in healthcare, but 20 plus years later, here I am. So backing up, started my career as an investment banker, as you mentioned, was always on that CFO, the stay in investment banking or move to a CFO track in a corporation. I did make that jump. I was part of the .com bubble burst, which was my first jump outside of investment banking. And, so good company, bad timing. And next thing I knew, I was, after a year of that experience, was trying to figure out what my next endeavor was. Was I go back to investment banking? Did I want to stay in the corporate world? And an opportunity presented itself in healthcare, which I was not interested in being in the space at all. And, but it was with a company, it was a surgery center group that had 2 locations that were young and looking to expand. And so I came on board and helped run a center and then ultimately build out 2 additional sites, and then was part of the team that ultimately sold it out to a public corporation. So 6 years later, I was an operations expert in healthcare, taking my finance background. Now I had these 2 sets of, I had healthcare experience, I had operations experience, and my finance background. And that led me to U.S. HealthWorks, that's where all the pieces first made sense together. And I was heading up really business development, M&A at a healthcare company. Wow. So that's how I got to it, the start then. But then I did that for a while. Then I jumped out of the corporate world. I was like, felt a little bit more like I wanted to be a little more free flowing. And I started working with a variety of just different businesses on some more strategic projects, but then got lured back into corporate world again with Western Dental, same role, different company, same CEO actually as I had at U.S. HealthWorks. And that was the connection. And I did that for a year, only then to realize that what I was really enjoying about before that time in between the 2 companies was working with a variety of businesses on different strategic issues and challenges, some of it being more tied to my mergers and acquisition experience, others really that strategy. So I kind of realized I had a set of tools that gave me some unique perspective on really helping businesses out in the healthcare services sector, as opposed to, as much as I want to help everybody, I sort of like play to your strengths and play to your areas of expertise, and sort of dialed in on that space for the last several years.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So if we then fast forward to now, what would you say is the most important work you're doing for your clients?
I think, I think that I've gotten to work with a lot of clients of all shapes and sizes. And I think that what I see consistently is really smart people doing what they know how to do well, whether that's, some are stronger on the operations side, some really get the people side of their business, but they don't have all the pieces. And they often don't know what they don't know. I find that finance piece is commonly, that true finance muscle is most often lacking. So I like to fill that void at times. But the way I've kind of walked into each opportunity is let me really understand the business, and how do I almost become a fractional part of the C-suite? That's really how I've so in one company, I would say in the last couple of years, I've been a CFO, others I've been a chief strategy officer, others I've been a chief development officer, and others another chief operating officer. I literally have sort of worn a different hat, but it's understanding what their strengths are and where there's a gap, and trying to work with their team to sort of eventually close those gaps, whether it's bringing in people or raising their game.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely in it for the long haul with my clients. I'm never like that 3 months in and out. It's more like that. I'm expecting to be here in 2 years, kind of working with you in some way or another. Yeah.
And what's the value of that? Because there are some folks who they come in, they do their work, and there is this kind of transformational piece that's helpful. But then there's another kind of relationship where it's like, yes, we're getting into this. What is the value in that for your clients in particular?
Yeah, for me, it's right. I'm bringing my experience, and it comes from a wealth of channels, and my own direct operational experience, and then all the other clients I've worked with. It's really trying to, help them go to the next level. So it's a trust factor. I mean, I think as much as anything else, because I become a trusted part of that, almost like a chief of staff sometimes in other companies, where that CEO and I have to have a really dynamic relationship and building out with that team. So I get to really make some tweaks and changes once I'm really embedded in the business that can have some pretty dramatic impact, or at least that's my goal always. We usually get there. But I think without that trust, if it feels just more transactional, if I'm not really building that deeper relationship, it's harder to get buy-in. I can give them my insight, but then how do I make it actionable? So I actually not only get to help give input, and help make it actionable. And so that's been the part that's been fun for me. It's unique challenges, but also driving it helping drive to the end goal.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Now, you mentioned this bit on true finance. And I'm actually going to come back to that here in a moment. But there's kind of this fundamental thing I want to address with you, and I think you're going to be able to do it well. And that is that we often don't call doctors or dentists business owners, right? They don't run businesses; they run practices. And there's a lot of language around staying away from the language around business. But when I was reviewing your website, I saw you said business all over the place and business owner. And so why is it that, it's not all the healthcare industry, but a lot of the healthcare industry kind of leans away from this language of business? And is it helping or hurting?
Well, I think that if you look across specialties, I think that the vast majority, or almost all doctors, walk into their field with an interest in truly providing care. I have a passion for medicine, it might be dental, but are actually providing care to patients. So I think they start with that backbone. And the industries have certainly changed a lot in my 20 years. But if I go dating myself, but I go back in time, I do think it was much more streamlined. Like, I'm a very busy doctor with a very busy practice, and I make money from it. But that sort of happens just because of what I'm doing. There has been a big shift. I think the massive influx of private equity money into a huge number of different, almost any imaginable medical sector, healthcare services, they've kind of emerged. So you get the minds now going with, what are we building? How are we profitable? They'll talk to me about EBITDA. I'm not sure that they always necessarily really understand it, but we then work into what that really means. So they're hearing all these, some business down the street got acquired. So it's just changed practice. And now people start thinking about, can I expand my locations? Can I be multi-site? Can I add other subspecialties? They're seeing this business-minded mindset, which is emerging over the last decade in particular. And so there's an awareness now that I don't really think did exist historically.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they necessarily have all the tools to think in the best business way. Some of them do. I mean, there's some doctors that have just absolutely blown me away what they just innately know. They just get it. They'd be successful no matter what business they had chosen to go into. And others that really need that additional, experience or muscle to help them kind of further their goals.
And it's one industry that I've seen a lot more M&A activity and roll-up activity happening than in others. And so is there a threat of being left behind? Is it okay to still be the doctor who's very busy and has a very busy practice and happens to make money?
There is that fear of missing out. I see it in the dental industry, particularly. I spent a lot of energy there. That being said, there's that number, I think it's like 15% is the current guesstimate of dentists that practice under a bigger group DSO or dental service organization environment. So as much as you see all this massive consolidation, still 80% of the field or 80+% of the field is still independent.
Right.
But there is that changing dynamic of, if I'm working chairside for years, I can have a nice business, but could I be part of something bigger? My own dentist that I go to he's an independent doctor and wants to stay that way. And we have talks while I'm sitting there getting my dental work done, or getting a teeth cleaning. And, I like what I do. I'm successful at it. I maybe would add another location, but I don't know if I want to. So I still think those people, if they have a successful practice, but I think they have options. They have that chance. In other specialties, I do think, I think it's blowing people's minds that, I'm a psychologist, and now all of a sudden I'm a hot target for a behavioral health roll-up. Like these things were never, they never would have envisioned this. So I do think there's like an education process of should I care? And ultimately it comes down to what's your exit strategy. And I think that's the biggest piece that doctors historically never had a good solution for, other than I'm going to have somebody buy my practice and take on my patients. And there really wasn't a huge upside to that because they were the sole asset versus buying and selling into a bigger group. There's a clearer path to exit and a much bigger financial reward. And that's been the big shift in the industry, starting to get familiar with that and understanding what that could mean for them.
I'm glad you brought that up because it was actually my next question here. And that is, what is the key to a successful exit now? There's kind of new rules to the game here. So healthcare industry in particular, your sweet spot, what's the key to a successful exit in your opinion?
Not picking up the phone and saying, I'd like to sell my business tomorrow. I'm ready to retire. That's like the disaster, right? That is that historical situation of what it used to be. And my lease is up in 8 months. I would like to sell my practice. Now it's that, whether it's, I'd say start thinking 5 years ahead, but anything 3 years, 2 years, whatever, giving yourself some runway, because if you're going to get acquired by a bigger group, they want to know that the asset they're really acquiring, in that case, the doctor, is going to be part of that, or at least a period of time, a committed period of time. So somebody who's thinking, I want to retire in 5 years, now might be the exact right time to sell a majority of their business or minority with an option up, just so that they've got their succession plan. They've given the committed time frame. They can actually continue to create income. And then it's easy to ride off into the sunset in 5 years because it was baked into their deal. And I think that with the way the world has shifted from the roll-up standpoint, exactly as you mentioned, that's how they have to start thinking about it. So those that are thinking, I've had doctors come in like, I don't want to do anything for 10 years. I'm like, okay, great. This is a fun conversation. I don't know how much work we're going to do together now. Let's talk about it, because I do think it's great when they're putting that into their mind and actually starting to think about what their paths forward are and giving time to get their house in order from a financial standpoint.
Yeah.
Because even that, then they're, virtually any businesses, but definitely a medical practice is usually woefully unprepared for what that really means in terms of a deal. You can get a deal done with, I used to buy practice all the time. That's really how I ended up on this side of it, was recognize how much money was being left on the table by sellers, because they didn't know how to tell their story and present their financials in a way that would command the most value. So helping them get that path figured out and get the benefits, so when it's time to sell, they're really actually already ramped up and going to get the max value too. That's a big part of what I sort of zeroed in on when I went out on my own.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned ahead in the conversation this idea of a true finance function, and most people missing that. How do you define that?
Well, I think practices, in the healthcare field, they're used to getting maybe a lease on some equipment. They'll send their their bank statements, and what came out of their record, their electronic health record system, to their accountant, who just does a quick tally like a bookkeeper and says, "Here's your books for your financials for the month." It's just sort of a rinse and repeat, no real thought process to it. I have cash, I pay my bills, what's left I take. And I'm going to deduct as much as I can personally to get my tax benefit. I mean, that's sort of like the extent of their thought process largely. And I've seen that go on with companies that have grown into like way beyond the size and scope of that's as simple as they should be thinking.
Right.
It's just an underappreciation of what, a little tweak here and there from thinking about the numbers a little bit more, how it can actually help you make some decisions. Whether they think they don't, if they're not looking at my supply costs are wildly out of whack on margin compared to other competitors, like they just buy what they buy, use what they use. Can I renegotiate? I've had plenty of practices tell me, sign contracts like, why would you sign this insurance contract? Oh, why didn't you negotiate? Oh, I didn't know I could. Like, wow. So there's really just, they don't know what they don't, it's just literally lack of information to provide to them. I think every medical school program would benefit by adding in at least accounting 101, finance 101, marketing 101, just some building blocks so they could really think a little bit more strongly about their practice as a business.
We could probably spend an entire episode on here, so this isn't a fair question, but do you feel like the average doctor, dentist, healthcare practitioner is coming out of school with the right training they need to run the business that they're starting?
No, I don't. But I think that's why there's been this, also the allure of joining into these groups, from a debt perspective to manage their debt load, pay down their student loans. But I think then they can get a little bit more perspective if they join the right group. So I think there's been a prevalence of that. It's a safe entry into the space versus starting off, putting up their own shingle and starting their own practice. I do think just by nature of what I've experienced in my career, I do feel like dentists just seem to be more business oriented than a lot of other medical practices because they're not as insurance based, even though it's dental insurance. So I think they walk into an environment that is a little more marketing business savvy required, or they have to learn it faster, versus joining a big orthopedic group and now you're part of a cog. But all in all, I think there's a lot of just on-the-job learning or getting acquainted with the business side of things. So they don't seem to get armed with that unless they got it in some of their undergraduate studies at all, but usually pretty light.
Yeah. So on the back of that, folks walk into this not knowing what they're missing. One of the things you said, they just don't know what they don't know. And so question I've got for you, and I ask this of every guest we've had on, but what's the biggest secret that you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing that you wish everybody listening or watching today knew?
One thing that I wish everybody knew is that, you need to have a plan. I mean, I think that, talk about business need to plan. Like I'm talking about, I'm in this sector of this health, that everyone needs to have a business plan. Even if my plan is I'm just going to see patients. Do I want to see more patients? Do I not? Am I happy with what I'm earning? Do I want to do anything differently? And think towards it and work towards a goal, knowing that I've worked on business plans for 30 years now and know that most of them end up being wrong, right? But it's at least you're directionally guiding yourself. Like where do you see yourself or where do you want to be? And it seems obvious, but I think people who are going to start their first business, like, hey, I've got a concept, they write their first business plan and then when they're done. And I think business plans should be rewritten or reviewed at least, annually, at least on a cursory level. And so many businesses, never like a healthcare practice, don't think about it like that. And it really is a business that needs a plan. And the plan could be really simple, but at least you have to know, what you're gearing towards. So to me, that would be, if everyone kind of thought about that, I think it would change, the way they view what they're doing day to day.
It's so true. It is so true. And I see that happening across industries, particularly with those who got into the business to do what the business does, right? They can become so preoccupied for doctors helping patients, right? That they lose sight of the rest of that. And then you see, especially other folks in the organization start to struggle. One of the, complaints from the outside of the industry that I have with is they often have trained, undernourished staff, right, that are not doctors. And it's a frustrating process for everyone. And so even just from the client side of the equation, saying, hey, we want a group of people who are all going in the same direction, because I want to know that what's important to each of them is the same, and I get a better experience for that. So I think you're absolutely right. And that idea of rewriting your business plan is unfortunately revolutionary, right? It's such a true point. And also, I mean, there's so much to unpack in there. It's good. You just go back and listen to it again. I don't need to re-say it. Just listen to Michael's. There's so much depth in those few short words. But I want to make sure we can connect folks with you more, because I know there's some folks who are just like, this is exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. But before we get there, I'm going to have you take off your consultant hat for a moment, put your CEO hat on, kind of jump down into the ring with the rest of us. And what's the next stage of growth look like for you and your business, and what challenge will you have to overcome to get there?
Yeah, because of the nature of how I like to work, where I really am that add-on bolt to a team where I sort of get integrated in. In that capacity, I limit myself because I can only work with so many clients at a given time. So to my own detriment, building the team the way I would like it. I bring people. Yeah, I'm more sort of an independent guy who brings people in on spot things where I need that extra expertise. But I work on project by nature, which I really enjoy. So that means it's what I want to do. So what's that next stage for me is that the evolution of, do I want to broaden the client base that I work with, which would be bringing on some different components in a much more true, consistent capacity. Do I want to do that, or do I kind of just love what I'm doing, but then I tinker with it on the side, like, oh, I wish I had time for X, Y, and Z. I could provide the guidance, but I need somebody to do the heavy lifting. So it's my own, to my own detriment. I've sort of structured myself in a way that and I'm doing, I'm happy with what I'm doing. So if I want to grow, but that's my challenge. And so they're struggling with my own, own right. So as a CEO, like, how do I want to grow, or do I like what I'm doing? My exit strategy, that's, again, a different path. I think some of these companies I have a deeper tie into. So do I ride that in a whole different way? So it's always just, but I do think that what I'm doing today and what I'm doing in 3 years, one way or another, will be different. Just I sort of evolve as I see challenges and opportunities.
Yeah. So good. So Michael, there's folks out there listening, especially from the healthcare industry, just saying, like, this guy gets it, right? Like he just understands my world, and I need more of this. How can they find more out about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, my website's inflection360.com. Not infection, but inflection. It's all about the inflection point of a business. Is kind of how I focused on my building my client base. LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. I'm definitely the only Michael Roub, ROUB, out there. So easy to track me down. Then I'm very responsive there, but people can ping me off of my website too. And I just love to talk to executives or business owners and really understand what they're doing. Even if I'm not the right guy for the long term, I love to just sort of share some insight and help people along on their own paths. So I love to connect with people across the landscape and talk about what they're doing.
That's fantastic. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. It's just an absolute honor and privilege to have you here. And for those who are listening and watching today, your time and attention mean the world to us. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.